Starmer's point of view that he is deeply, deeply uncomfortable with. But he is no longer, an international human rights lawyer. He's prime minister. And, as Trump has shown, you have to deal with the sort of world as the real politique of the world.
Iranian airstrikes are continuing across the Middle East following the US-Israeli attack on Iran over the weekend. Also, several US warplanes have crashed in Kuwait, close to a military airbase, according to the Gulf States Ministry of Defense. And 2 drones heading to an RAF base in Cyprus have been intercepted after an Iranian drone crashed into a UK military base overnight. Let's speak now to Lina Khatib, Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Lina, good morning. Good afternoon.
Morning.
Good afternoon, rather. Sorry, I'm 2 minutes out. My mistake. It is the midday update. I should have spotted that. Look, the US and its Gulf allies have said Iran's actions are a dangerous escalation. What do we know about Iran's strategy responding to these attacks from the US and Israel?
Iran's strategy is to try to survive for as long as possible while eventually dying fighting. I don't think Iran can win this war. I don't think the remaining leadership in Iran thinks that they can. It's a matter of choosing how to die. And what we are witnessing is Iran feeling an existential threat and using basically all the tools that it has in order to inflict as much cost as possible on the countries around it and on the US and Israel.
But I mean, the process of lashing out at not just America and American assets, but American allies in the region, is that because they're trying to sort of raise the cost of this for America?
Absolutely. Because Iran knows that it cannot win this war against the US and Israel, it is trying to inflict as high a cost as possible on the US by attacking its assets and its allies, US allies in the Gulf region and elsewhere in the Arab world, and now even trying to attack a British RAF base in Cyprus. This is the Iranian way to try to, as a last measure, to try to survive, get this war to stop by trying to show the US and its allies that the cost of the war is going to be more than the cost of, getting rid of the Iranian regime itself. This is Iran's last hope of trying to end this war, basically.
Well, so if we're talking about Iran's last hope and a regime that's struggling to survive, what happens if and when it doesn't survive? How does it collapse, and what is the immediate aftermath?
It is unlikely that the Iranian regime is going to survive, and that's not because we are likely to see classical regime change or even regime change a la Venezuela. What is more likely to happen is this sustained military pressure by the US and Israel, coupled with bottom-up pressure from the street in Iran, causing the remaining leaders of Iran from the military establishment that rules the country, particularly the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to fracture in terms of deciding what to do next. And the idea is that there are some elements within this establishment that are more pragmatic than others. And the hope is that those pragmatic elements would eventually take over the reins in Iran and agree to engage with the United States. It is not going to be a regime change from the outside. It is more likely to be regime implosion from the inside.
And I mean, if that were to happen, Lina, what's the danger of chaos in Iran? Because we know, Iran is made up of a patchwork of different ethnic groups. The majority are Persian, but they're only a majority. There are Kurds, there are Azerbaijanis, there are other groups as well. What's the chance of there being just a really destabilizing explosion there?
If the change happens through the internal scenario that I talked about, chances of chaos will be minimal. And we have to remember that those different groups in Iran are not armed groups. Yes, sometimes there have been some attacks like in the Ahvaz area. But for the most part, it is not like Lebanon, for example, during the Civil War, when you had different sectarian factions all armed and fighting one another. The situation in Iran is very different. So if this change happens through a pragmatic takeover, if we can call it that, this minimizes the chance of wider chaos in the country.
Finally, Lina, as we began by talking about the attacks that Iran is conducting on American allies in the region, such as the UAE, is there a point where the UAE and other countries like that begin to put pressure on the Americans because they want these attacks to stop, or will they simply be blaming the Iranians for this?
You see, this is Iran's calculation also, that if it goes after those Arab countries, they are going to then tell the US to stop the attacks on Iran. But what is happening, in fact, is the opposite. Even though Iran has inflicted some damage on those countries, and it is currently escalating in the sense that it's starting to hit civilian infrastructure like airports and also gas facilities in Qatar and, targets like that. Ultimately, these Gulf countries are more likely to align even closer with the US in this campaign, because now they have announced, as of yesterday, after they had a high-level ministerial meeting across Gulf countries, that they reserve the right to defend themselves militarily from Iranian aggression. The UAE has in particular called Iran's actions terrorist. And so this, to me, does not sound like a country that is going to ask the US to stop.
Thank you very much indeed. That is Lina Khatib, Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Now, Donald Trump has said he's very disappointed in Keir Starmer after the Prime Minister initially blocked US forces from using Diego Garcia to carry out strikes on Iran. Speaking to The Telegraph, the President said it was unlike anything that's happened between our countries before. Starmer has since changed his mind, allowing the US access for only specific and limited defensive purposes. Here he is explaining his decision.
We have taken the decision to accept this request to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved. The basis of our decision is the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives.
Well, joining me now is the Times' policy editor, Oliver Wright. Hello, Ollie.
Hello.
So, look, Donald Trump has said Keir Starmer took too long on this. Is there some truth in that?
Certainly from the American perspective. I mean, this, you may remember, was a conversation that was happening several weeks back around the use of the Diego Garcia military base and that message that Trump put out on Truth Social, where he said how disappointed he was about the UK decision to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Now, what that was really about was the UK's refusal to allow Diego Garcia and an airbase in the UK to be used for this putative operation against Iran. And now, obviously, you've had this change of position from the UK government. They're now saying because of Iranian attacks on Gulf countries and indeed on Cyprus, the Americans can now use this base. But, I think from Trump's perspective, it's a case of a bit too little, a bit too late.
Well, I mean, Starmer, he's being criticised by the right for not endorsing the strikes. He's being criticised by the left for kowtowing to the Americans, even though it took him a bit longer to do so. He really, domestically politically, he really can't win this, can he?
He really can't. And, obviously this comes against the backdrop of the Denton and Gorton by-election and the large number of Muslim voters there who went to the Greens. Now, you can overstate that too much, but I do think there is a sensitivity within Labour. I mean, you saw Starmer himself in his statement made explicit reference to the war in Iraq. There is a huge nervousness about getting embroiled in this in any way, shape or form, and a very fine line that Starmer has to walk. But the danger is he just ends up ends up alienating both sides, and neither side is happy.
From what we know of Keir Starmer and his own instincts and politics, and I appreciate we don't actually know as much as perhaps we should, but he is a former human rights lawyer. He will have he will presumably have personal grave worries about the legality of this. His comfort zone really is not being involved, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely right. And I think you see a bit of a difference between the UK and the German perspective on this. You saw the German Chancellor effectively saying, international law is not what it once was, and we have to deal with the reality in front of us. And that is something from, I think Starmer's point of view that he is deeply, deeply uncomfortable with. But he is no longer, an international human rights lawyer. He's prime minister, and as Trump has shown, you have to deal with the sort of world as the real politique of the world.
The Middle East is playing an increasing role in British politics. It was, hugely important in the Gorton and Denton by-election. The Greens, who are, I think Labour are worrying about increasingly, are attacking Labour on the basis of the Middle East. And Labour's relations with Muslim communities are looking pretty strained. How much worry is there about this within government and within the Labour Party?
I think there's a very, very significant worry about this. I mean, let's not overstate it. We're still a very long way from, the next election. But you saw, the consequences of the war in Gaza, even in Labour's landslide in 2024. Thangen Debonair, who was supposed to be culture secretary, she lost her seat to the Greens. Wes Streeting came very close to losing his seat. So, they are aware that, what happens in the Middle East can very quickly turn into a domestic political issue. And I think that is, part of the triangulation that is going on in government. But as I say, there is a danger that, you end up pleasing nobody.
Look, finally, Ollie, Whitehall is discussing plans for a mass evacuation of Brits from the Middle East. What's the latest on that?
The latest on that is they are drawing up contingency plans, and they want to see where things go over the next few days. I mean, this would be a huge logistical operation. More than 100,000 Brits in the countries that are affected. Now, obviously, not all of those will want to leave, but there are very significant numbers of people who weren't planning to spend any time in Qatar or Dubai. They were people who were transiting through those countries on their way back to the UK or their way to places like Australia, to Thailand, to India. Those are the people that are, really stuck. And the question is, what do you do? Now, if those airports and that airspace is only shut for a few days, they can probably stay where they are. But if you're starting to look at weeks, that becomes a different proposition. But equally, trying to get people out probably through Saudi, you need to have buses. It is not entirely safe travelling through that area anyway. And I think, there's a huge number of things that the government has to weigh up. So at the moment, what they're doing is they're looking at the contingency plans, but I don't think we're anywhere close to putting those plans into action at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Ollie Wright. Ollie is the Times' policy editor.